Check. Stop recording.
Hello and welcome along to this tutorial of FS Tramp, the autopilot add-on which I use to fly. And in this video I'm going to give you a demonstration of the interface, the best way to actually get a flight set up so that your flight plan is in from departure to arrival. We're not actually going to fly the flight because once you're up in the air everything is very much auto, and look out for an upcoming tutorial with some takeoff and landing tips to help you with your Tramp experience. But this is more the actual Tramp interface and getting around that, because if you've never used it before, maybe you've used FS Pilot before and you've taken the step up to Tramp, maybe you've never used a flight sim before, the FS Tramp interface can be quite interesting when you first view it. So there's a lot of things I wish I'd been able to just know straight off the bat when I first got into using Tramp, I guess, and instead, because the blind flight simulation community all kind of discovered it together as we went along, we kind of discovered new things as we went, and then shared that knowledge amongst ourselves. And now I'm going to hopefully try and compile as much as I can into this video, and update the tutorial series with the add-ons that I currently use. So basically we're currently down on the ground. I'll go into the sim here. In FSX it's pretty much the same in P3D. The one thing I will say though is that it is a bit more laggy in P3D, FS Tramp, and you will lose focus a little bit more, I found, than in FSX, especially if your system is a lower end. It will be a bit more laggy, but no matter what your system is, you'll notice a bit of a change. But the principles to get around the interface are pretty much the same. So yeah, that's what we're demoing. So on the ground here in the 737 at East Midlands, we're going to do a very generic flight. This is East Midlands, my home airport, heading out of here to Dublin in Ireland. We're not actually going to fly it, as I say, but we're going to set the flight up from scratch as if I was going to do it. So the first thing we need to do is actually get a basic flight plan in. And the way we do that is use a flight planning website. I personally use SimBrief. I would recommend everyone to use SimBrief. It's probably the most realistic one out there currently. Project Fly themselves are hoping to come out with a dispatcher, but that has no release date on it at the moment. So SimBrief I would definitely recommend to use, plus they give you a nice briefing package with lots of helpful text information, as you will see soon, that we will use in Tramp. So I use SimBrief, and I use SimBrief through Project Fly. I combine the two. So let me show you how we do this. So we're going to go to Project Fly as if we're going to set up this flight from scratch. Alright, so we're going to do the usual fly now. We're going to go East Midlands to Dublin, and I'm just going to select the first flight here, Ryanair, blah, blah, whatever, I don't care. Let me find a Ryanair aircraft in my fleet. There, that'll do. There's one. Now this is an important screen. Obviously you'll come up with how would you like to dispatch FR537, SimBrief Auto, Advanced. Obviously you can do all this. Now your Advanced is where you can input info on your own. I usually do Auto, it's just easier. And click this, and it's going to load with a progress bar, and it will put all the info in, and you heard it confirm on the latest AIRAC there. And it's just generating me a flight plan and briefing. So it's now done that. We've been pushed to the bookings page because that booking is now ready to go. So first thing we need to do is export the routing, or export the flight plan. So this flight plan just has all the waypoints that we're going to need on the way. So file type, obviously we want the PLN. If you're confused as to what I'm doing in Project Fly, then go back. There is a tutorial on that. We want it to go to Flight Sim X, export. Oh, it says unavailable. Right, so that's been exported to the folder. So now we've done that, we can see there's a briefing link. But before we do anything, I'm going to just take you through the Tramp interface. So we're back in the sim. Now the Tramp window is a part of the sim. It's not like FSX Pilot where it's a separate application completely. It's part of the sim. When you boot up the sim, you boot up Tramp by extension. And the default hotkey to open the Tramp window is Control F12, which will hit, and you heard it says FS Tramp Map 1, so it's thrown me pretty much into the middle of the Tramp interface. So we're going to go to screen review mode now by hitting NVDA. Hang on, my keyboard's different. You hit the NVDA modifier key, and let me, yeah, page up. I'm using a wireless keyboard that doesn't have page up keys, so I have to use different key combinations. So it's NVDA page up, so I'm going to hit NVDA, which is my caps lock key for me, and page up, and we go to, shut up, and we go to screen review, which is what we're going to use to get around the Tramp interface. Bear in mind, when you are getting around other applications like Project Fly, it's probably best to switch back to object review, just because it's easier in general. Right, so let's go right to the top. Okay, so that's just the FS Tramp. Then we've got Plan and Tools. These are two pretty important buttons, so I should probably just actually tell you which keys I'm moving around with screen review. It's very simple. It's just NVDA modifier, up and down arrows to go up and down, left and right to go left and right. So if I go right now, you can see I'm going across the Plan button letter by letter. So that's the Plan button, and then there's the Tools button. Two pretty important buttons. So as you can see, it doesn't call them buttons, obviously, but they are buttons. They're just there as text, but we can click on them. Let's go down again. Fine. That's the Find Text Field thing, where you can open up a text field to find airports. That's useful if you want to create your own flight plan using FS Tramp's auto route generator, because it does have a route generator. I don't use that personally. I think it's better to use the Simbury flight plan that you're given and just add things to that. Right. We're going to keep going down. Anything of interest, I'll let you know. The rest of it, just assume, is pretty much useless. We don't need it. That's the avionics button. Tramp can control the avionics of your aircraft. Of course, you can also use Shift M to toggle them on and off. So what we've just seen there, where you've heard ID, course, alt, which is altitude, speed, etc., that is the headers for the route tree view. So the main part of Tramp is a route tree view where you've got all your waypoints of the flight plan, and those are the headers. So each waypoint will read out your assigned course, altitude, speed for that waypoint, etc.
179 degrees.
That is your current heading, the current way that your aircraft is facing. That will obviously change dynamically as you're in the air.
Proc.
That is the Proc tab. This is like it's kind of like a set of tabs here that can be useful. The Proc tab we don't really need, but if we do NVDA Shift Left, that will take us back to the Plan tab, which we can then do a left click on if we need to, and that's helpful if you get lost with Tramp and you need to get back to the main Plan tab with your routing, then we can do that. Let's carry on going down. So those are those headers again,
179 degrees.
and that's the yeah, it threw me back up the page a little bit because we changed tabs. Go down again.
310 feet.
So we have the heading of the course. That is the current altitude, 310 feet, which is obviously the elevation of this airport. That will change dynamically as well.
Yes.
That's the description thing. We don't need that.
0 feet selected.
That is your vertical speed. Again, changes dynamically.
0 kts.
That's your indicated airspeed, which will also change dynamically. Don't forget there is a difference between ground speed and indicated speed, airspeed, so they will be different on here to what you have on Project Fly, for example.
113.70.
That, I believe, is your, yeah, you can see below there, your nav1 frequency. You don't need to touch these, but you could, in theory, change these.
110.60. nav2.
That's your nav2 frequency.
0 to 4.0. ADF.
You can see
Map1.
you've got your ADF there.
Map1.
Then you've got map 1. Obviously we don't really need to touch any of that because we're not really bothered about maps, but that is a mode that you can go into.
Fly plan M1.
Fly plan in M1, that is an important button that we will look at later. That's a command to tell Tramp to fly your plan.
Fly holding M.
Fly holding, I haven't experimented a lot with that, but you can put it into this mode and get it to fly holdings around waypoints. Could be useful for VATSIM maybe in the future.
Autopilot map 2.
That's your autopilot button, which will turn on the aircraft autopilot. I'll go into more detail of that later, but that will turn on the autopilot.
000. HDD.
Now that says 000 heading, and you're probably thinking, well, hang on, we had a heading earlier. Why is there more headings and things down here? The heading we saw earlier, remember, was different. That was, I think, 79 degrees. This one is 0 degrees. So this isn't live information here. This is what Tramp is aiming for. So the information above is what the plane is actually doing. This information that you were going to see here, if we go down again, 30 degrees max bank, so you can, that tells you the actual max bank of the plane, by the way, and you can change that if you think it's too much in the aircraft.cfg of your aircraft. If we go down again,
000.
here we go. That's 0 on the altitude. So this is what Tramp is aiming for, as I said. So for example, if your plane's climbing to 30,000 feet, on that altitude you would see there 30,000, but back above on the live information you might see, you know, I don't know, 15,000, because your plane is still climbing. So yeah, this information down here gives you an idea of what Tramp is aiming for.
000 FT/min.
And that's the feet per minute again, what it's aiming to get.
000. Yes.
That's the indicated airspeed, again what Tramp is looking for.
0.00. Mach.
And that is that indicated airspeed translated into a Mach speed.
340. Nav.
And then
APPR.
the rest of this down here we don't need to really touch. You can see there's an APPR there for approach. You can arm the approach. I know some people have been experimenting with trying to get Tramp to actually intercept an ILS and pick that up, with putting it into different modes, and have had limited success. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't, so I've sort of just kept away from that. But yeah, hold just 1 second. I apologize, I just had to check something there with my phone. But yeah, so I've kept away from the ILS thing, but feel free to give it a go when you're a bit more advanced. And the rest of the stuff down here I wouldn't really bother, because we're using screen review. It starts picking up some of the stuff again, so we're gonna leave it there. So the important parts of that interface really that you're gonna need are obviously your plan and tools buttons at the top, your live plane information for what the plane is doing, and then your information for what Tramp is heading for, you know, with the what it's trying to reach with speeds and altitudes. Alright, so that's the Tramp interface explored. Control F12 rather will close Tramp, so we're back in the sim. So now let's say we know about the Tramp interface and we actually want to program in this flight plan. Well, what do? So we've just exported the flight plan. So initially the first thing we need to do is come in here, back into the Tramp interface, and go right up to the top. Keep going up with screen review and go to the plan button. So I'm on the plan button. Now I'm going to do NVDA Shift M to move it, to move the mouse to that button, and you heard it say plan again, and click. That click, by the way, is an audio theme add-on for NVDA, which I actually recommend. It helps you with Tramp a lot, knowing where things are and whether you've clicked on things properly. Okay, so our mouse is now positioned on that button, so we're going to left click and it opens a context menu. Now this is a very important context menu. There's a lot of important stuff in here. I'll just walk you through it. So open will open a flight plan, and then you can select it. It'll open to your simulator's base directory, and you can then go in there and find your flight plan. It's usually the flight plan directory is usually in documents. Save is if you have added things to the flight plan in Tramp, which we're going to do with adding SIDs and stars and things. You can come in here and hit save so that it makes any changes to the PLN and saves them. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but if you plan on flying that flight again in the future, for example, you can come in here and hit save, and then it'll be ready to go as soon as you boot Tramp up. You won't have to add any SIDs or stars, it all should just be there. Obviously it's unavailable at the moment because we don't have a flight plan loaded.
Save as unavailable.
That's save as if you, well, I mean, self-explanatory if you need to go and change the name, I guess. Clear is if you want to completely clear all the flight plan out of Tramp. Obviously that's useful if you want to do multiple flights and you want to get rid of the flight plan that's in there, or if you've made a mistake and you need to just completely restart the flight plan editing in Tramp. I wouldn't bother touching that, but you can adjust things there. Aircraft, well, we'll be looking at that pretty soon, but that is the aircraft selection dialog, where you can go and adjust your aircraft and select the right aircraft profile for Tramp. You can come in here and change your cruising altitude and speed if you would like to. There are other ways of doing that, but yeah, that's one way. Generate auto route will open a window where you can get Tramp to generate a route for you. Let's say you've used that find text field that I showed you and added 2 airports, for example. You can then get it to generate an auto route. Again, I prefer SimBrief's flight plans, but that is possible. The generate auto route screen is pretty self-explanatory. It's just got, you know, like whether you want high or low altitude airways, whether you want to include SIDs and stars. It's very, very simple. Remove auto route, again self-explanatory if you've added one. Undo if you want to undo a change you've made to the flight plan. I think you can undo going back about 10 changes, so that's pretty good. Redo. Print. I don't know why we'd want to print, but you could. Print preview and setup. And then these are flight plans that you've recently added to your simulator. There. Right there. So you can select them. These are like the recent flight plans. Okay, let's go to open and select our flight plan. So we're presented with the list in our simulator flight plan directory. If we press E, then we're going to look for EGNX and to EIDW. Now, just as a note, SimBrief's flight plan names are a bit weird because it just groups all the text together. If you are a bit confused and you want to check that it's exactly the right flight plan, you can hit MVDA-L twice and it reads out the actual letters of the flight plan. Anyway, that's not the right one. I think that's the right one. EGNX to EIDW, that's the one we want. So we're going to hit enter. And that loads the initial flight plan with the waypoints into Tramp and throws us back onto that map button again. Right, so we've managed to get the flight plan loaded into Tramp. That's not the end of the story. We need to make some edits to our flight plan to make sure that it's correct and compliant with what SimBrief's given us, because whilst the waypoints en route are a good thing, we actually need to add SIDs and stars and approach procedures and all this good stuff. So let's go back over to bookings and hit briefing here, which will boot up a PDF page from SimBrief with a flight plan briefing. You can see it's titled that. So let's explore this from the top. There's some bits that are pretty pointless, some bits that are very helpful. So obviously all this kind of stuff. Now that probably don't make a lot of sense. It's just giving us a lot of the call signs and ATC things. That's the date. That's the aircraft. So let's keep going down. There's the average winds en route if you really want to know that. Maximum takeoff weight there is 79,016. I don't know what exact weight that is in. I think you can change it in settings. I think that should be in pounds. Estimated takeoff. Keep going down. So the most important piece of information in this first section is there where it says FL steps, which is flight level steps. which for this routing, it says EGNX, and then we're going straight up to 280, which is going to be our cruise. If you have a longer flight plan, you might notice that there's multiple flight levels there, different waypoints you might be climbing. On very long haul flights, because the aircraft's heavy, they'll often do step climbs, so they'll start at lower levels and then climb up gradually. Simbrief is a bit weird. Even on shorter flights, sometimes it gives you, a cruise altitude and then suddenly wants you to randomly descend in the middle of the flight at a waypoint. If so, just ignore that and note your highest cruising altitude. In this case, we don't need to. It's got it right. It's 280, 28,000. It's a pretty short flight, so that looks good. Okay, so this is the planned fuel. You can, of course, go and put this fuel into the simulator. Do remember, though, especially if you're using freeware aircraft, that they're probably not modelled quite correctly. The fuel modelling may not be correct, so Simbrief uses realistic fuel figures. The aircraft probably won't, because it's some freeware thing. Same with payload, so by all means go and add it in if you want, but I would personally have unlimited fuel on because I don't trust these freeware aircraft, and I do not want to be running out of fuel in the middle of the flight. So these are your fuel figures, the trip. You've got that figure. That's your alternate, how much you're going to need to get to Manchester there. I don't know, again, what weight these are in. I would imagine maybe pounds. I'd have to look exactly what I have it set to. You want it to match up with your sim. I assume that's like your final fuel. Minimum takeoff fuel right there. Extra, it's obviously not giving any extra fuel. Again, takeoff fuel. And it's given us taxi fuel. Block fuel. So there's a lot of info here that you could really get into if you wanted to. But we're just going to skip that for now. These are just like legal things. No tackling recommended. I herewith confirm that I blah blah blah. That's just, like for realism, it doesn't mean anything. So let's keep going down. So this is alternate route 2. And that's going to Manchester. This is like an alternate routing that usually they would have as a secondary flight plan, just in case, that would take you basically, if you had to divert to this airport to Manchester. Obviously we can't do that with Tramp. You can't really divert, which is a shame, but at least we know that Manchester is there as our alternate if for some reason we needed it. I guess if you were on VATSIM you'd kind of need to know that. And I mean, maybe you could boot up FSXP and quit Tramp if you had to divert as an absolute last resort, but that's not going to happen here. Alright, so then we've got routing and then route ID. This is an important part, the main part of the flight plan, which is our routing from East Midlands to Dublin. So let's have a look at this. So EGNX/27, that means it wants us off runway 27. This will calculate with the winds and everything where we should be going off. So 27, and then we can see after that it says TNT2N. That is our departure that we're going to be taking out of East Midlands that we will need to go and add into Tramp, and obviously that's going to take us to the TNT waypoint, and then we're jumping on the UQ4 or the Uniform Quebec 4 to Vabka, etc. All this en route stuff after the SID will be already in Tramp. We don't need to worry about that. Then what we do need to worry about after that is here where we've got just below that the arrival. So we can see we're going to Bagso, and then we jump on the Bagso 1 Kilo arrival going into Dublin onto runway 16. It doesn't actually give us the approach, so we don't know whether we are going to do an ILS. Ignore that. We don't know whether we're doing an ILS or an RNAV or whatever onto that runway, but we will work that out ourselves, and I'll show you the best ways to do that. But what we do know is coming in, we're going to be on the Bagso 1 Kilo arrival, and we're going to be coming in on runway 16. Okay, so now we know those details. Let me just check our departure again. Yeah, TNT to November.
Witness project. Microsoft
We're
Flight
going to go
Simulator.
back to
Exit 0
Tramp,
1.
and now we need to actually start adding things. So there's multiple ways of getting to things like runways. I'm going to show you how I do it, but feel free to experiment. Different people will do it different ways. So initially we're going to go right up to the top, and you'll see because we've added a flight plan, some new buttons will have appeared.
Top edge. Plan tools. Find. SIDS.
SIDS, you can see right there, is the SIDS button, and that will allow us to add an appropriate SID. If we go down again though,
RWS.
you'll see RWS, which stands for runways, and that will allow us to add a runway for our departure. So we're going to go to here first. We're going to do the NVDA Shift M
RWS.
on runways, and then left click to bring up our runways tree view. Just give it a minute to open. It will take a little while, not too long, but just be aware. So East Midlands is now expanded. We can see RWY09 and RWY27. We're obviously going off 27, so we're going to I don't know what it would be for you. It's some people call it the applications key. I guess you could call it a left click, but that's what we're going to be hitting, just like you would on the plan menu to
Context menu.
bring up a context menu.
Use center map return.
And we've got a load of options here which I'll just talk you
Use
through.
flight plan.
So using flight plan first is what we're going to want to click on in a minute, which will mean we've added runway 27 to our flight plan.
Skip to US.
You can skip to here, which will mean that your aircraft is essentially spawned to the runway, which we're not going to hit yet.
Expand item available light.
We don't need to do that.
Center map return.
And center the map, which we don't care about.
Use flight plan.
So we're going to hit using flight plan, and it will launch us back into Tramp.
Exit 01 FS Tramp.
There we go.
Dialog remaining. Preview level RWY27. RWY.
And it's plonked us back on runway 27, but we've now added that to our runway. So great, we've now got runway 27 as a departure. We now need to add our SID. Now you can control tab between the different sections. So we're currently on the runway section. To get to the SID section, I can control tab.
Preview level 0 East Midlands expanded 1
And it'll say East Midlands expanded again. If I go down,
Level 1 DPK collapse 1 4.
we've got BPK. Now the way the SIDs are usually structured is you will basically have the purpose of a SID in a flight is always to get you out of an airport following certain restrictions and get you to an initial waypoint of your flight plan. So there will be SIDs departing to a certain waypoint, you know, maybe to the east, south, west, north, all depending on where you're going. And so they'll all kind of be branched off. So for example, there's this BPK here. It's all like an expandable tree view. I could expand this and there'll probably be a few departures under BPK, which stands for Brooklands Park. They usually stand for something like the waypoints have names, but they're abbreviated. So we want a TNT.
DTY collapse 2 4 level 1.
No, we don't want that.
Fold collapse 3 4 level 1.
No,
TNT collapse 4 4 level 1.
that one. You can see it says collapse. So if we expand this, and I'll show you what I mean. So there's
Level 2
two.
Level 1 TNT expanded 4
Sorry,
4.
there's two under TNT here.
Level 2 TNT 3P0912.
So there's a TNT 3P from 09, obviously, which probably takes you to the TNT waypoint, but off runway 09. We're not off 09, we know that, so we're going to go down again and see what else there is.
TNT 2N27 level 2.
And that's the one we want, the 2N off 27. So you hear it gives you the departure name and then it gives you the runway. Obviously always make sure you're choosing the one that's off the right runway. Sometimes there might be ones under the same name, but make sure it's got the correct runway. Same principle here, context menu, but it's actually called associate with flight plan. That associate with by ETP there will actually change the way the departures are laid out. Some people find that easier, but the tree view like that with the expandable ones I find okay. So associate with flight plan. Release FP association does the opposite. If you've associated it by mistake, for example, obviously we can't expand that any further, and center map. So we're going to hit associate, and so now we have added the departure to our flight plan successfully. So it's now got that we're heading out of runway 27 and we're going on that departure. So when you get in the air, you'll probably have restrictions now, which means your aircraft might climb only not to your cruise but to a lower level as a restriction until the end of the SID. It may have speed restrictions, which I'll talk a little bit about in a bit, but those restrictions on that SID have all been added, and we can confirm this by going to our route tree view and having a look what's been added in there. Now the way you get to your route tree view is a bit weird. There's no command or button. You have to just screen review around until you hear what looks like a waypoint in that routing tree view. Just any waypoint, you'll hear the waypoint and then it'll start trying to read out to me the altitude and speed of that waypoint, etc. And that's then where you want to NVDA Shift M and left click on that. Now let me show you. So currently we are on the SIDS section. We're just going to screen review around, screen review up, so you can see it's just picking up random things here. Now that's what we want. So it had a waypoint there, D something something, and then it had a load of numbers which were probably the restrictions on that waypoint. That's a waypoint in our routing. So if we do NVDA Shift M, you heard it click just to let me know that it's moved the mouse to that point, and it spoke it. So I controlled that to stop it from reading, but we're now on that point. So if we then left click, it's now put me in a list on that particular waypoint. I'm going to hit home to move us to the top of the list. So you heard it say EGNX R27, so that's obviously been added successfully, and then it was going to read out a bunch of altitudes. Let me let it read those out just to show you. So you heard it read out the altitude, which was I think 306 feet. Then it started reading out the time, which I assume means if we were to start flying or taxi to that point, how long it thinks it would take us. It read out the fuel that we'd have at that point, blah blah blah. One of the most important things there is the altitude, probably. You always want to check the altitude of your departure and arrival. Just make sure you're not at a very high elevation airport. That's useful information to know. Obviously if you're at a high elevation for departure, more flap needed. I'll talk about this more in the next video that's coming out in this tutorial. And if you're landing into a high elevation, well obviously you're going to need to get your aircraft configured earlier. Then if we go down again, we'll see a bunch of waypoints here, D27A, etc. Now you'll remember in our SimBrief routing, the first point it gave us was going direct to TNT. So all these waypoints actually that we see here are part of the SID that are taking us to TNT. So if we go down again, D162G, 162D, and there's TNT. So that's taking us to TNT. And then we're going to Listo on the UK UQ4 airway, etc. So that's great. Our departure is all done. Now another thing I should show you just on the departure routing is once you actually are airborne, there's some interesting things you can do on these waypoints, but there's one specific thing you might want to do. So you remember how we were going to TNT. Let's say you get in the air and you see on the information that Tramp is aiming for example, when you look at that, it's got restrictions on your speed and it's got restrictions on your altitude. It is very common in real life for ATC to bypass you on a SID, as in to say, you know what, ignore this restriction, it's not busy, you can go direct to TNT. They may give you a direct, they may express you, they may climb you. It depends how busy the airport is, but they may do that. If you want to simulate that and you think, you know what, we're going to a very low altitude here, I fancy just skipping this now. I've been at this altitude for a while and we're at a pretty slow speed. Let's just bypass this SID and pretend ATC is giving us a direct. You can go to TNT here in the waypoint list, and you can hit the context menu key,
Plan point settings submenu O.
and you've got plan point settings. Let me talk you through
Simulator
this.
process.
Simulator pause first. We'll pause the sim at that waypoint. That's very helpful for top of descent. If you want to pause at a specific waypoint, you can do that by looking at, you know, its altitude. If we go down again,
Set altitude speed A.
you can change the altitude and speed settings for this waypoint, although it's not that accessible there.
Clear altitude speed available C.
Clear the altitude and speed, which is apparently unavailable, so we can't do that anyway.
Turn after passing T.
Turn after passing, I assume that will pass the waypoint first and then make a turn.
Bearing point E.
Bearing point, so we don't need
Left and
that.
position available L.
Don't need
Rename
that.
available R.
Rename.
Release procedures available P.
Release procedures, again, that's unavailable.
Simulator process.
So that's helpful if you want simulator pause, just to show you for top of descent. If you or you know, if you need a pause at a waypoint, you can have it do that. So that's the plan point settings. But the actual useful thing, if we keep going down, is called fly flight plan from here. And on a SID, this is useful because if you hit that, it will essentially cut out all the waypoints before and just fly direct to this waypoint. So it's like you've been on a SID and then ATC have said, okay, go direct to the TNT waypoint or whatever the waypoint is you're heading to on the SID. You can hit fly flight plan from here, there, and it will fly direct to that and get rid of all the restrictions. It'll climb you direct to your cruise and it'll go to normal speed. So that's a useful tip if you want to get rid of your restrictions. We'll escape out of that menu and go back into the route menu, or the route tree view, which we're back on TNT. So okay, we've got a departure and our runway added in. What do we need to do now? Well, we need to set our arrival up. So if we hit end, we can go to the bottom. That's actually useful there. That's gives you a total. So for example, it says total 237.6, that's nautical miles, etc. But if we go up one, so it says EIDW, which is our arrival airport, and it says D greater. So that basically means there's nothing added on this waypoint. Don't ask me why it says that. But there's nothing added, so there's no runway assigned. So we need to fix that. We need to add a runway, and we need to add a star for one. So remember what Simbrief said, I think it was the Bagso 1 kilo or something, but we'll have a look. And we also need to add an approach. You don't have to add an approach, I should say. You can just let Tramp kind of, it's as if it's doing a visual approach, and just, you know, after the star's ended, it'll just take you down to the runway through its own calculations. But if you'd like it to fly an ILS approach, or say an RNAV approach, etc., you can have it do that as well, which will just be a slightly different approach. So let's tab from this waypoint, which will automatically take us into the tree view here, where we can select arrival. So this takes us into very much like the SID section earlier that I showed you, where you had the expandable tree views with all the different arrivals or departures. We want Bagso, so let's go down again. That's the one we want. So we're going to right arrow to expand, and there's 8 items in here, so there's a lot of arrivals because Dublin has quite a few runways. And remember, we want the one for runway 16, so let's have a look. So that is a good example here. We've got the Bagso, or Bags as it's called it here, 1 kilo, but you heard it say 10. That's for runway 10. Simbrief wanted us runway 16. So that's the Bags 1 Romeo to runway 10. No, we don't want that one. The 1 Zulu, no. There we go, that's the one we want. The Bags 1 kilo for runway 16. So we're going to do the old context menu and associate with flight plan. So fantastic. We have added arrival, and because we've added that and it's going to runway 16, by extension it will go and add the runway, I believe, for us. We can check that at the end to make sure, but I believe it will go and add runway 16 at Dublin. So now what do we do? Well, we've got our arrival added in. We've got the star, I should say. So again, that will add restrictions. You might find your aircraft slow. It seems to be slowing down quite early. You might find it levels off at some points. That's to meet restrictions. But now we need to find out what approach we should do. Should we take an ILS for this runway? You know, what waypoint should we do? Because it's very important that you make sure the approach is compatible with your star. You don't want to be vectoring yourself all over the place, you know, because you're in the wrong direction for the ILS or something. So how do we find this out? Well, if we actually hit tab now, it will give us a briefing of the star we've just added in text. So let's hit tab.
List full star, bags 1 K16 not selected.
So star bags 1 kilo. Here we go.
Full star, bags 1. Cross bagso.
So we cross bagso,
Direct to ADSYS.
direct to ADSYS,
Descend to 6,000 FT or above and direct to care of all AC 230 KTS.
and then the last thing is descend to 6,000, direct to this Karev point, and we've got to be at 220 knots, I think, or 230 knots. So, okay, that could be useful for our approach, and I'll show you why. So that's our text briefing. Now we need to get to the approaches part. Now in P3D you can just shift tab from here. That'll take you back into the main section, and then you can control tab to the next part which will be approaches. If you're using FSX, there is a bug where it won't let you shift tab for some reason in Tramp. So what we're going to do is go up here with our screen review. You hear it say, I don't know why it says S, but it says RWS again. That's the runways. But remember earlier how I said if you see something like this, there we go. Oh, I wasn't supposed to do that. So whenever you hear a button basically like RWS, you are near all the main sort of tabs for the flight plan, which is SIDS, stars, runways and approaches. So if you just do MVDA Shift M there, it will put you on that section, and you can then use MVDA Shift left and right arrow to move through the tabs. So let me show you. If I go left, that's the stars, which is obviously selected because that's what we were on. AppRS, which means approaches. RWS, and obviously there's no SIDS there because we're not on the departure airport at the moment. We're not viewing that part. So let's go back to the left and go to the approaches tab, and let's activate that with oh, it's already activated from earlier. So you would activate that with MVDA Shift M, obviously, then left click, and this throws us into the approaches part for Dublin, like the whether we want an ILS or an RNAV or whatever, which we're going to look at. Don't forget, if you're in P3D, you could probably just control tab from where we were when we were on the stars section. You remember when we just done associate with flight plan on that Bagso 1 kilo, and then we checked the briefing on that. We checked the briefing. You could just shift tab back to the main stars section, and then control tab. I know it sounds confusing, but then control tab across to your approaches section. But because you can't do that in FSX, we have to come up here with screen view. Okay, so now we're in the approaches section, and we need to work out what approach we're going to add. Okay, let's go down. So we're looking for anything that we recognize here. So there's back to no. There's Kerav, and if you remember when we were viewing the information for the briefing on our star, oh, it's just chucked us back to the top, but I'll deal with that in a second. I have no idea why that happened. When we were viewing the information for our star, the last instruction on that star is cross Kerav at 6,000 with speed 230 knots, and then it just, that's the end of that star. So we need to then, we could either let Tramp just take control and say, you know what, Tramp, you've got it, flies in, or we could actually come in here and add an approach, which is what we're going to do today. So let's go back down to Kerav. It's one of these collapsibles. Let's open it, and there's a bunch of things in here. So you heard it say there Kerav.ILS16, so that means we could do the ILS 16 runway 16 approach. Okay, this seems to be a bug as well, it keeps chucking me back out, but let's ignore it. So we could do the ILS 16 approach. Let's have a look what else we've got. There we go, back in here. We could do the RNAV, which is what RMV stands for, 16.
VDM 16 305 level 2.
We could do the VDM approach 16, which is the VOR DME approach.
RMD 3445 level 2.
And then it goes on to RNAV for runway 34, which obviously we're not doing. So we could choose 3 approaches. This is really cool part of Tramp that I really like, the fact you can actually select your real approach. It's good for VATSIM, it's good for any ATC program, especially Pro ATCX users, because that will allow you to come in here. Even in flight you can change this stuff. If you hit cruise or something and you think, you know what, I want to change my approach, I think I did it wrong, you can come and take a look and change this up on the fly. Or if ATC, if you're using that, gives you a new approach. But we can choose which approach we want to do. There was 3 there to choose from on this particular start to this particular runway. You could do a bog standard ILS, whatever you want. You know, you can try different approaches if you come into an airport often, see how they differ, see how it flies them. So we're going to try just a bog standard ILS today. Let's go down here back to Carav. ILS 16. Guess what? It's the old context menu. It's back for more. We'll go there and hit associate with flight plan, which then associates that with our flight plan. So it's chucked us back into that approach dialogue. So fantastic. We've now got a full flight plan in for the arrival and departure with the correct procedures we've got. So basically, obviously we now know we're coming off runway 27. We're jumping on the departure that takes us to TNT. I forget its name. Was it TNT 2 something? Anyway, 2 November I think it was. Might have been 3 November, I don't know. So you jump on that, you head to TNT, jump on all the airways whilst we're at cruise. Then we're jumping on the BAGSO 1 kilo arrival into Dublin, and then once we reach the end of that we're going to descend down to runway 16 using the ILS approach, which is what Tramp will fly. And then you know, all being well, AP comes out at 200, we land the aircraft. That's for another video though. So if you want to be absolutely sure that everything's been added now, we can go back down to our routing section and check. So let's do that. So that is clearly a waypoint there. ANSYS, you can hear it's reading out all the numbers. So let's do MVDA Shift M and left click. It's always usually a random waypoint that you land on. So this one particular one was on the arrival. And we can go down here. And obviously check, so Carav and then EIDW there. And if you tab, you're back to the Bags 1K, which we've added. Now, if you do want to view a full summary of our approach, obviously we viewed the full text summary earlier just with the start. If you want to view with the ILS, we can control tab, and that's the Carav ILS 16 again. So control tab does work, you see, but here if we tab there, we get the full thing. So you remember cross BAGSO, direct to ANSYS, descend to 6000 there to Carav, and that was where it stopped. But now here in the text we've got a new thing, APPR approach through Carav, the ILS 16. So that's descend to 6000 and cross Carav, just confirms that. Direct to this Aruda waypoint. There you go, you heard those instructions. 3000 at this waypoint, a course and a speed as well. Again, it's really good to look at this information once everything's been added before you fly, then you know what to expect. So now we know, as soon as we hit 3000 we're going to be slowed to 180. That's to be expected, and we know that, and we can get flaps out if we need to accordingly. Okay, that's another remaining at 3000. Looks like we're going to stick at 3000 for a little bit. There you go, so then descend to 271 feet, which is obviously the elevation of runway 16, with a course of blah blah blah. And then, yeah, perfect. So that's all added in. We're good to go. So the flight plan's all in. The only other thing you might want to do, if you've never flown an aircraft before in the sim, every time you load in, you want to go and make sure that your speeds and everything and your profile is selected correctly. Obviously I've flown this aircraft before, so it already is, but let me show you how you do that. Let's go right up to the top, go to plan here, go down to aircraft, So the first thing you're on is a name, and that's the name combo box. You can go up and down here. It comes with a lot of default profiles, Tramp. You can even create your own. Obviously it's selected on 737 at the moment because, as I say, I've already flown this aircraft. Now this is a checkbox which is a bit confusing. It was for me at the beginning, but what this actually does is there's two autopilots that Tramp can use. The first one is the actual aircraft autopilot that comes built into the simulator, and that is used by a lot of freeware aircraft, including this one. However, if you're using payware aircraft, you have to understand that a lot of the payware aircraft developers they will, as a standard, they will code different and specialized autopilot software that's probably not just the standard default simulator stuff. In which case, you cannot use the simulator autopilot. So the Tramp developer coded his own Tramp autopilot that is completely independent. Oops, ignore that. That is completely independent of the simulator and can fly aircraft that are payware. So if this box here is unchecked, it will use the simulator autopilot built in to the sim. I would recommend that if you possibly can to use this. So all freeware aircraft, normally this will work. If you're using a payware product, however, you probably want to give the Tramp autopilot a shot.
OK button.
That's the OK button. So once you've finalized everything, you can go back to your main interface.
Cancel button.
Obviously.
Help button.
Help.
New button, Alt+N.
New is if you want to make a completely new profile, you can click on that. You can also use all the profiles and change them. So for example, I could go into that name box here. Let's say Boeing released a new aircraft. I could type in there Boeing 797, and then I could go back through this dialog and edit the parameters that are already there. Delete is if you want to delete a profile. Autopilot without auto throttle. This is for any aircraft that don't have auto throttle, so it won't control the speed. You would have to control the throttles yourself. I wouldn't recommend that. It's pretty difficult. If you want a challenge, certainly give it a go, but it is tough. And obviously most jets anyway do have auto throttle. Climb, this is the initial climb in feet per minute that the aircraft will try and reach, provided there's no restrictions. It can't if there's altitude restrictions, but if it's just straight up to cruise, it will try and reach 2,500 feet per minute. That's usually a good thing to aim for. Obviously be aware, as your aircraft gets higher, it will reduce the climb rate because it can't maintain that at higher altitudes. That's your climb speed. So as soon as you go above 10,000, it will start aiming for that speed, and obviously it'll get past that speed and faster as you get higher. But that's the initial. Cruising, now this is a general cruising speed for the aircraft at a general cruising altitude. This is not the cruising altitude for this flight. This is just like because it's a profile, it's a generic thing to give Tramp an idea. But if ever you want to check your speed is going to be correct, you can always come in here before a flight, and I could then adjust my speed. So the next box is the indicated airspeed that it will try and reach at that altitude, and that's the Mach speed that will be. So we're cruising at 28,000. So if I was to then go into this box here and change that to 28,000, alright. If I was to then come in here and change that to 28,000, you can see that the speed indicated is the same, but the Mach speed comes down, obviously because we're lower, so the Mach speed will be lower at 0.73, and then I can adjust that if necessary. So the whole point is, the higher you go, even if you're maintaining the same speed, because of the laws of physics, your aircraft will have a higher max speed. So you have to then come in here, I would at least, and adjust that. So 0.73 is a bit slow, so I could then go 0.77, which increases the indicated airspeed to 306. because we're at a low altitude, the indicated airspeed will be faster. If you know anything about planes, you'll know what I'm going on about. If you have no idea, then basically just come in here, set your cruising altitude for whatever the flight is, and make sure your max speed is good for the aircraft. Look it up if you don't know what it is. For example, the 7.3 max speed is 0.82 on the Mac. You probably want to be lower than that. Descent, this is the initial feet per minute that Tramp will aim for on the descent, and it's also the initial feet per minute that it will use to calculate how far from the airport to start descending. Do of course be aware that it won't be able to maintain this descent rate all the way down. It may have to go a bit faster or slower to keep up with the vertical path. Touchdown. This is the touchdown speed in knots that you aircraft will aim for as you touch down on the runway. 140 is a good speed for a lot of jets, unless it's a heavy, in which case you probably want to go about 150-ish. No, I don't want to do that. This is the fuel flow, which is in pounds. Now this is the climb fuel flow, so how much fuel it's going to burn on the climb. I don't think you need to change these, but you could in theory come in here and set it exactly how much fuel you want it to burn at the climb and cruise and descent phase of the flight, but I just leave these as default. It really doesn't matter all that much. Then we're back to name, so let's hit OK. I'm not going to hit save because I changed the cruise to 28,000, but I am going to hit OK so that my new speed of 0.77 registers. Right, so it's put us back in the Tramp interface. Right, perfect. So that's pretty much it. There's not a lot else to do. Everything's set up to do a flight. I know that seems probably quite a long time to set up one flight, but I mean, do remember I was explaining that to you. I could do that a lot quicker if I wasn't messing about explaining. And B, it takes them a while to go through a real aircraft FMS. This is not FSX Pilot where it creates the flight plan for you, you stick it in and hit run takeoff and off we go. You know, this is actually proper procedures. So that's the flight plan in. What do we do now? Well, you would start up your aircraft. I'm not actually going to do this because, as I say, we're not doing the flight. The rest of it is pretty simple. You start up your aircraft. Then we would go back to our routing because we're currently at a gate, so we go back here. There's a waypoint in our routing. Oh, maybe it wasn't, it didn't work. Let's go up here. No, that's not one. There's one, EIDW. Click into our route tree view, and we want to. So now, shut up. All right. Okay. So we are at a gate. We want to. Let's say we've started up. We want to spawn to the departure runway to actually take off. We can do that by going up to the top with home. EGNX runway 27. So we can then do the old context menu, plan point settings. Oh, I apologise, it's not in there. It's there, skip to here. And we can just hit that and Tramp will launch us to that runway. It's very simple, skip to here and then you're at the runway. So once you've arrived at the runway, I'll just hit that escape. All you need to do with Tramp is hit... Shh, thank you. All you need to do with Tramp is hit Control F11 and you will hear a noise like this. And that will mean it has selected your flight plan. And as we can see, if we go down to the information that Tramp is aiming for, see, this is what I'm talking about here. So you see here 0 feet per minute, 310 feet. You can see screen views picking up some random things, but that's our current altitude. They're what we're currently doing, but if we actually go right down here to what Tramp is aiming for, you can see it's aiming for 53 degrees on the heading, 6,000 on the altitude, and remember before I said if you want to skip the restrictions you can, with the fly from here command in the menu, but
0500
it's
speed
also
limit.
going to be aiming for, it's currently 500 feet per minute, that'll increase when you get airborne,
250.
and 250 knots, so there's no speed restriction. So you can see there, the flight is loaded and it's actually ready to fly. All we'd have to do is take off, and Tramp would be in control. So once you've taken off, it will fly it pretty much flawlessly. You'll hear a beeping noise every time it changes to a new waypoint. You can always see what waypoint you're at simply by opening the Tramp interface. You'll hear it say, it'll put you basically in the route tree view, and then it'll say, let me show you. Right.
Microsoft Flight Simulator X.
Oh, I took a screenshot,
Menu.
didn't mean to do that.
Microsoft Flight Simulator X.
Right, here we go. So, Control F12 it, and just listen to what it does.
Dialog D278 1.7 MEIDW 277.4 NM.
So it said,
278 1.7 MEIDW.
okay, it said D270A 1.7 nautical miles, so that's the next waypoint that we're going to be heading to, or the one that we're currently heading to. Obviously we're not, because we're not airborne, but if we were, that would be the one that's the next. That's the very first waypoint on our departure. And then it started saying EIDW, and it would have told you the amount of nautical miles to your destination. That's how you can see what waypoint you're on. Do be aware the distance, say on Project Fly to the airport, will be different to the distance that Tramp gives you, for the simple reason that Project Fly measures it in a straight line, whereas obviously a flight plan can be a bit, you know, all over the place. It's not a straight line. And let me close that. Yeah, that's pretty much all I need to say. Tramp will fly the plane perfectly from there, at least it should do. You can check out your speeds and altitudes. Now if something's going wrong, or you are using ATC and you think you need to change headings, there is a way to do that, and I will quickly show you, because I'm probably going to do this in another tutorial with the ATC add-ons. But if you actually need to change what Tramp is doing, so let's say here, let's go down here to the information that Tramp is aiming for. Let's say I didn't want that altitude there. I could easily NVDA Shift M that and left click into that field, and I think that's how you're supposed to be able to do it. Yeah, there we go. So these are the edit boxes here, vertical speed, etc. You can simply go into those edit boxes and change the information. Change it and press enter, and that will change the information to what you put in. Do be aware though, for example, if you change the altitude yourself, Tramp no longer has control of the altitude. You have control of the altitude, so you need to then give Tramp back control whenever it's best for you. So you know, like if you change the altitude and then you hit cruise, Tramp no longer has control of the altitude, so it'll keep you at the altitude you select, but it won't then start descending automatically because it doesn't have control over the altitude. The way to give it back control is either to toggle the fly plan by doing Control Shift F11, that, which takes it out, and put it back on again with Control Shift F11, or you heard it say altitude checkbox not checked or whatever. You can then go to that and recheck that checkbox. But the fly plan command is probably easier. The Control F11 command is of course very useful. That's what you use when you're on the runway, and that will tell Tramp, okay, I'm ready to go, or you need to reassume complete control, turn on the autopilot and fly the plan. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend actually going in there and changing the values that Tramp is aiming for unless you use an ATC, and even then try and avoid it because it can cause issues. It can be, you know, like you changing stuff and Tramp, it can conflict. It can cause, you know, like if you change the heading, for example, Tramp then can't follow the headings on the flight plan properly until you reassume, until you give it back control. So that's FS Tramp. It's an interesting interface. It will take you a bit of time, but you will get used to it, and everyone has different ways. I know people who use auto routes from Tramp. I know people who don't bother adding any SIDs and stars because they don't want to add procedures, or who don't bother adding approaches. Really up to you, but that is the way I do it. That is my my tutorial. It probably sounds pretty complicated. My best advice is get Tramp. It has a trial. I think it's 20 Flight Simulator sessions you can have before the trial expires, although I think I have more than 20. Yeah, follow along with this tutorial if you can. See if you can set up a flight and get going, and hopefully you will get to know what's going on. The only other thing I was going to mention was when you do open Tramp. Oh, I took another blooming screenshot. When you do open Tramp and you're in flight, it won't do it now, so I'll get rid of it. But you may hear progress bars going up and down, like the NVDA progress bar sound. That is Tramp changing the input fields. Well, as you fly, it might be changing the speed or the altitude, so that's what the progress bars mean. Kind of annoying, but that's just how NVDA interprets it. So, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it's been informative. I know we haven't actually flown anywhere, but there was no real need to, because that's the main part of Tramp, really. Once you're flying, it's just sit back and enjoy. And there will be more tutorials coming on using Tramp with other add-ons, such as ATC, Radar Contact 4, and things like that, and also some takeoff and landing tips, because obviously Tramp is great once you're in the air, but it wants you to do the actual takeoff and final landing part once the AP cuts out. So, hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. I hope it's been informative and you've got some info out of it. Feel free to watch it as many times as you need to if you're a newcomer to Tramp, because it can be a bit overwhelming. And, yeah, any comments, of course, questions, let me know. You can always email me at blindflightsimmer44@gmail.com, and yeah, I will see you, put it back to object review, in the next video or stream, whatever it may be.